The month of Tishrei in general, and the Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah in particular, are characterized by a series of specific foods that we eat during this time, especially on the first, the Yom Tov Suda, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, and throughout the month of Tishrei, and obviously also by foods that we don't eat on Rosh Hashanah, and according to some customs, even later throughout the month. Obviously, we're all very familiar with these customs, and we know more or less what we're doing and why we're doing it. Nevertheless, the goal of this class is going to be to go through the background of these customs, where they come from, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to answer some common questions that do come up, and perhaps some questions that are not as common because people don't think of it, and also some other perhaps lesser known halachic details that have to do with eating the simanim and other foods that we eat on Rosh Hashanah, and overall just to give a thorough exploration and background of this very, very interesting, unique area of Jewish custom and halacha. For example, some of the questions that we want to deal with. Everybody knows Rosh Hashanah we dip an apple in honey because we want to have a sweet New Year. So, if you think about it, that's very nice for honey. What does that have to do with apples? Why don't we dip mango in honey or banana? Maybe we can't. They have to be specifically an apple. But we don't eat nuts on Rosh Hashanah. What kind of nuts? Does that mean you can't crumble a little bit of nuts into a dessert or another food? What is exactly the definition of nuts? And many other questions and details that come up again and again. And this is something that's very simple, very straightforward, very interesting, and something that applies to everyone. So, without further ado, a little bit of introduction. It's a very interesting Gemara. Gemara tells us in Maseches Krisos that if somebody wants to know whether they're going to live out the year, then during the Aseres Mitzvah, they should take a candle, go into a room that has no doors or windows. Obviously, it has a door with the door closed. And with the windows closed. In other words, that there's no wind, and set up the candle in the room and watch the candle. If the candle continues to burn out, then they know that they're going to live out the year. And the opposite doesn't say in the Gemara, but the opposite is implied. Then the Gemara says, if somebody wants to know whether their business venture is going to be successful, they should raise a rooster. If the rooster becomes big and fat and beautiful, then they know that their business venture is also going to become big and fat and beautiful. And again, the opposite is implied. And the Gemara gives another example of a similar type of thing you could do in order to predict the future. And then the Gemara says, Lav milsahi. Don't do it. Don't do any of these things. Why not? Because maybe it's not going to work. And the fact it's not going to work because for a different reason. Maybe you left the window crack open and that blew out the candle, and you didn't realize, and that's going to make you so stressed out and concerned. We know that tracht gut wird sein gut, and the opposite is the opposite. So your stress and anxiety about this siman not working out is that itself is going to cause your mazel to become worse. So therefore, the Gemara says, don't do this. So this thing with the candle and with the chicken, everything else, we're not doing any of that. Then the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, Abaye tells us, now that you said simana milsahi, now that you told us that simana is a siman, milsahi, literal translation, is a thing. So siman is a thing, which in today's language, we understand what that means. Now that you know that simana milsahi, says Abaye, Yehi ragel inish lamechal reshata kara verubia karsi silke v'tamri. A person should eat on Rosh Hashanah, and it gives a list of 5 foods, which we'll discuss in a moment what those 5 foods are. But in other words, what's Abaye telling us? That simana milsahi, there are certain negative simanim that we don't do, but it is possible to manufacture a positive siman. And therefore, at the beginning of the year, when we want to have a sweet new year, sweet and successful new year. So there are certain things that we could do, that we could eat on Rosh Hashanah in order to give us that siman that we're going to have a good year. What are the 5 foods that Abaye mentioned? So the list is like this: kaira, ruvia, karsi, silka, betamri. It's always tricky and challenging translating, giving precise translations for foods that are mentioned in the Gemara. But generally, the accepted translations of these are as follows: kaira is squash, rubia is fenugreek, which is a type of green leaf. Karsi is leeks. Silka is chard or beets, which are related. And tamari is dates. So what is special about these 5 foods? Squash, fenugreek, leeks, chard, beets, and dates. So Rashi and the Gemara explains, all these foods grow very quickly. And they grow, and from when you plant them, they grow to maturity within a manner of a few weeks. It's like 70 to 100 days or something, and that's pretty quick. There are obviously plants that take years to materialize, so that is a siman that your mazel, a person's mazel, should grow and mature and become fruitful very, very quickly in the coming year. However, the reality is that dates do not grow very fast, unlike the first 4 items on the list. So therefore, there's a second reason that Rashi says the same Gemara is mentioned in 2 places, and one place Rashi does mention it, and the other place Rashi doesn't mention it. Rashi says dates are sweet. Dates are sweet. So you want to have, it's a siman, lashana, teva, umisukah. You have a sweet new year. Okay. That's one reason, because they grow quickly or because they're sweet. However, the Rav Hagoyin is brought down that he would eat these 5 items mentioned in Gemara, and for each one he would have a specific tefillah that he would say along with each one. For example, when he would eat ruvia, he would say Yirbu Schayesenu. Ruvia, again, we mentioned this fenugreek, but it's not so much about what it is, but it's about ruvia is from the lashon Yirbu. Yirbu Schayesenu. We should have many schusim in the coming year. When he would eat karsi, when he would eat leeks, he would say Yichirsu Seinenu Karsi Yichirsu. Same word. Salka, he would say, which is beets, he would say Yistalku Ayvenu. There's a different gersa, Yistalku Chatesenu. Our enemies should disappear, or our averis should disappear. Tamru Yitamu Seinenu. Tamru is dates, we Tamru Yitamu. Our enemies also should vanish. And kara, which is squash, he would say Sheyikra Gzar Dinenu V'Yikra Lefanecha Zchuyesenu. Kara Yikra Gzar Dinenu. The judgment against us should become torn up. V'Yikra Lefanecha Zchuyesenu, and our schusim should be read before you, before Hashem. Now, Rav Hagoyin would just he would eat ruvia and he would say Yirbus Chayesenu. But in later Rishonim, it's brought down that you'd say it as a tefillah. Yiratzum Lefanach Hashem Elokeinu V'Elokei Sheyirbus Chayesenu, and you eat the ruvia. Yiratzum Lefanach Hashem Elokeinu V'Elokei Sheyikra Gzar Dinenu V'Yikra Lefanach Chayesenu, and you would eat the squash, etc. So we have 2 reasons. Rashi says because they grow quickly, and because they're sweet. Rav Hagoyin says, no, it's nothing to do with that. Or it seems to say it's nothing to do with that. No, there's a specific connection here with the word. Ruvia is connected to the word Yirbus Chayesenu. However, if we think about it, you really need both reasons. Even according to Rav Hagoyin. Because, let's think about it, it's a famous question over here. Ruvia, why? Sheyirbus Chayesenu. Our schusim should be abundant, should be plentiful. Karsi, why do we eat karsi? Why do we eat leeks? Sheyichirsu Seinenu. Our enemies should be cut off from life, obviously. So, if something is good, you can interpret it Yirbus Chayesenu. Something is bad, you can interpret it Yichirsu Seinenu. So then eat anything. If it's good, then it's for us. If it's bad, then it's for our enemies. Or for our averis. So, you need to have, why does the Gemara list 5 specific things according to Rav Hagoyin? So it must be that Rav Hagoyin, this is how many Mefarshim answered, that Rav Hagoyin is also relying on Rashi's opinion. Really, there's something inherent about these 5 foods that they grow quickly or that they're sweet. But on top of that, he added, no, there's a simon here. The whole point of this is that simon amilsahi. So there's a simon over here, sheyir b'schei yisenu, sheyichur suseinenu, etc. According to, based on Rav Hai Goyen's explanation, that there's a specific allusion to in the names of these foods, the Magen Avraham tells us that these 5 foods we were given their Aramaic names, and Rav Hai Goyen extrapolated from them certain simonim, certain allusions based on their Aramaic names for the Lashon Kodesh, for a word in Lashon Kodesh. So says the Magen Avraham, it works in any language. Whatever something has a certain name in a certain language, and if that name means a good thing, so eat that on Rosh Hashanah. And we know that we eat carrots on Rosh Hashanah because merin is from the word mer, more. Yeah, that's where this minhag comes from. It comes from this Rav Hai Goyen and from the Magen Avraham, who tells us that it's the same thing in every language. Now we can also understand that seemingly it should also work the opposite way. Something that has a negative name in any language should not be eaten on Rosh Hashanah. So maybe sour sticks and sour cream and sourdough, maybe deviled eggs, I don't know, shouldn't eat on Rosh Hashanah, unless they have something inherently about them that they have a simon. Like karsi, you could eat even though it's a negative word, but because we interpret it as yichur suseinenu, because we interpret a negative thing that's going on our enemies. But how come we're able to do that? Because they inherently have a good simon that they grow quickly. So you have to find something. It's hard to... I shouldn't actually do this. We should stick to the minhagim that we have, that we received from our ancestors. But these are the core principles that come out from this entire discussion. And the truth is that the Aruch HaShulchan, writing about 150, 200 years ago, he says no, they eat anything in where he lived in Babraisk, in the Viaduct. He said they eat anything. If it's good, they interpret it for the Yidden. If it's bad, we interpret it for our enemies. But again, practically, what we do is we stick to the minhagim that we have. But this is the general introduction to the whole concept of simanim, and indeed the Tur, when he brings this Gemara, he tells us the Rashi and Rav Hai Goyen and all the things that we're supposed to do and eat and say. Says the Tur, from this developed many minhagim in many different places. For example, he says in Ashkenaz they eat an apple dipped in honey, and he brings a few other examples of an apple dipped in honey for a sweet New Year. So now that we have that introduction, let's go to the details of what do we actually do step by step. So in Shulchan Aruch, and in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch as well, in Siman Tavkuf Pegimel, the Gemara is mentioned. The Gemara says, and the Shulchan Aruch says that a person should eat on Rosh Hashanah karsi, silka, tamri, kara. A person should eat leeks and beets and dates and squash, and whatever is called in another language. In the local language, based on the Magen Avraham, whatever is called lashon ribui, something that sounds like merin, we eat that. Practically, I've never seen anybody eating squash or leeks or dates, but again, there are different minhagim that developed in different places. But this is the minhag. This is the Gemara. This is the basic thing. What it says in Shulchan Aruch, the Alter brings in Shulchan Aruch as well, is that when you eat ruvia, you should say Yiratzim L'fanecha She'yir B'schei Yisenu. When you eat karsi, you should eat Yiratzim L'fanecha She'yichur Suseinenu, Yiratzim L'fanecha She'yistalko Yivenu. However, as we know, and as we'll discuss a little bit more soon, Minhag Chabad is that we do not make any of these Yehiratzins besides for the Yehiratzin on the apple. Okay, And then the Alter Rebbe tells us that there are those who have the custom of eating a tapuach masik b'dvash, a sweet apple dipped in honey, and we say the Yiratzin tischadesh aleinu shana tova u'mesuka. And the Alter Rebbe says you make a bracha on the apple, you don't make a bracha on the honey, because the honey is secondary to the apple. Okay. Again, so this minig we mentioned already. The Torah mentions it that it's a minig Ashkenaz of eating an apple dipped in honey. It's mentioned in Avodah and Maril. So in other Rishonim or early Achronim, which the source of minig Ashkenaz, and the Ramah brings it in Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe brings it in Shulchan Aruch as well. Why specifically in apple? So for masuk and dvash, we understand. We want to have a sweet New Year. Why specifically an apple? There are other fruits that are sweet. The answer is that the Mefarshim say apple is a reference to chakal tapuchin kadishin, which is which literally means chakal tapuchin kadishin means the holy orchard of apples, but it's a reference to the Shechina, which Al Pi Kabbalah has several names, and one of the names of the Shechina, one of the ways that the Shechina is called, that we mentioned it on Shabbos also, is chakal tapuchin kadishin, and when we eat the sweet apple, we're davening that the Shechina should be inclined towards sweetness and not towards bitterness, chas v'shalom. So, an apple dipped in honey. Says the Alter Rebbe tells us, and it's based on a Magen Avraham, that when you make a bracha on the apple, because even though we washed, we still have to make a bracha on an apple, because apple is not... There are the things that we don't make a bracha on during a meal after you wash, called dvarim habayim b'toich hasuda. An apple is not considered dvarim habayim b'toich hasuda, so therefore it requires its own bracha, and it is not exempt from the bracha that was made already on the bread. So, whenever you make a bracha on something, the Magen Avraham says, and the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch as well, you should first say the Yiratzin, and then the bracha. You should not first say the bracha and then say the yiratzin, because then the yiratzin is going to be a half-second interruption between the bracha and eating. And as we know, when you make a bracha on something, you have to start eating right away, or making the, or without making unnecessary interruptions. So, like I said, this is what the Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch. It comes from a Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham says, lechatchila, this is what you should do, lechatchila. In other words, it sounds like he's okay with it, but l'chatchila you say the yiratzin first, and then the bracha, and not the bracha and first the yiratzin, the Magen Avraham, and then the yiratzin. The Magen Avraham does bring over there another opinion from the Machzer Maglei Tzedek, who says you should first say the yiratzin after the bracha. And the Magen Avraham says, and the Maglei Tzedek explains, and the Magen Avraham explains the Maglei Tzedek's reasoning also, that it's not a hafsek, because when you do something that's for the purpose of eating, as we'll discuss in a minute, but we do it every Shabbos. You make a bracha on eating on the challah, and then we cut the challah, and then we dip the challah, and then we do other things, and it takes a good 10 seconds before it actually gets into your mouth. It's not considered a hefsek, because this is all called l'tzerech achila. This is all part of eating. So therefore it's not considered a hefsek. So the yiratzin is l'tzerech achila, because again, remember, what's the whole point of here? Simana milsahi. Simana milsahi is we're eating something, and the only reason we're eating this is to daven for a sweet new year. So this yiratzin is integral to the eating the apple. So therefore it's not considered a hefsek. The Magen Avraham is not so happy about it. He says, yes, it's a tzerech achila. It's not such a big tzerech. You could do it before, don't do it after. It's a hefsek. And the Alter Rebbe, as he usually does in Shulchan Aruch, paskins like the Magen Avraham. However, later in his life, the Alter Rebbe wrote a siddur, and as we know, in the siddur, the Alter Rebbe, in many places, rules differently than the way he rules in Shulchan Aruch. And although in the siddur it does not say it explicitly, but this is the Alter Rebbe's words in the siddur. Rosh Hashanah b'layla rishayna neig and lechel tapuach masak b'dvash. On the first night of Rosh Hashanah, we eat a sweet apple dipped in honey. B'tchila sasoda, at the beginning of the meal. V'tzarich levarich b'tchila baruch v'cholo b'yir priya. You first need to make a bracha b'yir priya. It's v'achar kach yoymar yiratzim l'fanecha shetechadesh aleinu shana teva u'mesuka. And then, right away, he said the yiratzim l'fanecha shetechadesh aleinu shana teva u'mesuka, which sounds like you don't eat first. It certainly doesn't say to make the yiratzim before the bracha. Just make the bracha, then make the yiratzin, then eat. And as we know, that is indeed our minig. That is indeed our meaning. We make the bracha, right away say Yiratzim l'fanacha shetachadash aleinu shana tova u'mesuka, and then eat after saying the Yiratzim. Why we prefer specifically to do it this way? There's a very beautiful letter of the Rebbe where the Rebbe explains that basically we want to connect the Yiratzim to a bracha. It's a bit of a longer explanation, but in a nutshell, we want to connect the Yiratzim to a bracha. And we do not have the ability to invent new brachas that are not mentioned in the Gemara. And we're very careful about this. And that's why we don't say, that's a different discussion. I don't want to get off topic. But we do not have the ability to invent new brachas that are not mentioned in the Gemara. However, we do have a trick. And the trick is to connect it to a bracha that we're saying anyway. What's another place where it's preferable to do this? Tfilas haderech. And Tfilas haderech is an even bigger chiddush, because Tfilas haderech is a bracha. It ends off Baruch Atah Hashem Shemei Tefillah, but it doesn't start with a bracha. It doesn't start with the words Baruch Atah Hashem, and we know that long brachas are supposed to start with Baruch Atah Hashem and end with Baruch Atah Hashem. So why does the Yiratzin, for whatever reason, with the Tfilas haderech, for whatever reason, does not start with Baruch Atah Hashem, so it's preferable to connect it to another bracha. So you first eat something, you make a bar nefashis, and you right away say Tfilas haderech. So that way, the Baruch Atah Hashem from your bar nefashis goes on your Tfilas haderech also. And this is not ma'akev, you don't have to do this. A lot of people are not particular about this, and that's okay. You can do it even without that. And so over here, you could do the Yiratzin before the bracha, but we want it specifically to be connected to the bracha, and the Rebbe explains very beautifully and thoroughly why we don't want to do it before the bracha, why we don't want to eat first. It has to be specifically in this order. And again, just to clarify, the Rebbe is not coming to explain why it's not a hefsek. The Magen Avraham already told us why it's not a hefsek. The Magen Tzedek told us why it's not a hefsek. The Rebbe is telling us why do we prefer to do it specifically this way, which the Magen Avraham says is not lechatchila. So the Rebbe is telling us that this b'diavad for us is a lechatchila. We want to do it specifically this way. An important halachic detail that is important to know. If you bring a whole apple to the table, so the halacha is in Shulchan Aruch and Simmer Yeshvav, and the Alter Rebbe also mentions it over there in Simmer Yeshvav and in Seder Berachos Hanan and Perek Tes, that when you have a whole fruit and you're eating a whole fruit, it's a mitzvah min hamufcher. It's the ideal way of doing a mitzvah is to make a bracha before you cut it, because you should make a bracha on a complete thing. So if, for whatever reason, some people do this, they don't cut the apples, they bring a whole apple to the table, so you make a bracha while the apple is still whole, then you cut it, then you dip. It's not a hefsek. We do it like we mentioned earlier, we do it every Shabbos with challah. You make a bracha, hametzi lechem eretz, then you cut, then you dip in salt. It's not a hefsek, because it's all tzarich achila. So the same thing with the apple. Now, you don't have to bring a whole apple to the table. If you cut up the apples in the kitchen, then you bring it to the table, so then you're not getting into this, there's no option for you anymore to do the mitzvah min hamufcher of being mevarach al shalom, and that's not a problem. The problem is for you to cut it, and then, but if it's brought to you lechatchila, in cut up pieces, that's fine. But then, now we already have the option of minimizing hefsek. In that case, you should first dip it in honey and then make the bracha. Because, how do we know this? By karpas. The Rebbe is, in his comments on the Alter Rebbe's Haggadah on Pesach, is medayik from the Alter Rebbe's wording, that when you have karpas, you should first dip it in the salt water and then make the bracha. You should not first make the bracha and then dip in the salt water, because again, there's no shaila of mitzvah min hamufcher of making a bracha on a whole onion, because we're dealing with cut up pieces of onion. Once you have the option of minimizing hefsek, then you should minimizing hefsek. It's already not a tzarich, because you could have done it before. But if you're making a bracha on the whole thing because you want to do the mitzvah min hamufcher, so then you don't have the option of doing this. So then you make the bracha al hashalim le mitzvah min hamufcher. When you make a bar priya eitz on the apple, one should have in mind also to the pomegranate that we're going to eat later, as another one of the samanim, that it should be the bracha of bar priya eitz on the apple should go also on the pomegranate. Okay, the next minhag that the Alter Rebbe tells us in Shulchan Aruch is that one should eat Rosh Ayil, the head of a ram. Why the head of a ram? Because it's a Zeicher Le'eloi Shel Yitzchak. It's a reminder of the Akedah, which we know the Akedah in general is an incredible schus for us. That's why we say it every single day in the beginning of davening, because it's a schus avis that we've been we have not we've been using out to its full extent throughout our many long centuries in Gullus, and we never miss an opportunity to remind Hashem about the Akedah. And throughout the Rosh Hashanah davening, there's I don't even know how many mentions of the Akedah. So that's why specifically Rosh Ayil, the head of a ram. If ein Rosh Ayil, yechar Rosh Kavas. If there's no head of a ram available, then you eat the head of a sheep. If there's no head of a sheep, you should eat the head of something else. But you should eat a head. Why? Near l'reish v'lei l'zanav should be a head, and we should not be a tail in the coming year. That's for sure. And this custom of eating the head of a ram is mentioned also in Sefer Minhagim Chabad, that we eat the head of a ram. This is Minhag Chabad. The common minhag in practice is to eat the head of a fish, and although we don't get the Zeicher Le'eloi Shel Yitzchak, the Zeicher of the Akedah, which I mentioned earlier, don't worry, we get plenty of other Zeicher of the Akedah throughout the davening and in many other ways. Not to mention the Kriyas HaTorah of secondary Rosh Hashanah. Okay? But we fulfill another meaning by eating the head of a fish, is that there's a meaning to eat fish. Why? Lifres v'leibres kadagim. We should be fruitful and we should be multiply like fish. So we eat the head of a fish, so we fulfill the meaning of eating fish, which is it's assumed by itself, and of eating a head. Now that we mentioned fish, I just and the meaning of eating fish is lifres v'leibres kadagim. We should be fruitful and multiply like fish. That's also one of the reasons for tashlich. Why do we say tashlich? Because we go to Be'er Mayim Chaim, V'royim Dogim Chaim, and we see live fish, and it's a siman shenifre v'nirbe kadagim, as the Dr. Moshe tells us in the B'Shem the Maril, if I'm not mistaken. And there are many reasons given for tashlich. There's dogim is ein pekicha. There are reasons al pikabala. There are reasons al pinigla. L'hashlich havenesav al mitzules, to throw away your averis into the depths, which is again that's a reason al pikabala. That's not a reason al pinigla, but there are many reasons. But one of the reasons is for a simon to see fish shanifra v'nirbe kadagim, and we know that the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, was particular to actually see the fish. By tashlich. Obviously, it's not makiv. If you're in a place where there's no fish, you can do it by any body of water. There's even shmos from the Rebbe, maybe it's even written that even to do it by a sink or something, by open just a tap of water. Because, like I mentioned, there are many other reasons for doing tashlich. A lot of them just have to do with water. And even the ones that have to do with fish. So you know the fish are in the water, and all the water is connected. But also, again, there's simana milsahi to actually see the fish. There's an Indian actually to see the fish, and actually one of the versions of the Gemara that says to eat squash and dates that we mentioned earlier in the Gemara, that is the foundation of this whole idea of simana milsahi. One of the versions of the Gemara doesn't even say to eat; it says to see. So to see the fish is also an important minig as part of Simona Milsahi. Again, obviously you have to make yourself crazy for it. It's not ma'akev in any way. And you can do tashlich even without seeing the fish. But if there are fish, it's kedai to make a point to try to see the fish. And okay. Another custom that's brought is to eat pomegranates and to say nirbe schuyos karimin. To Yerasim Fanacha, that we should have as many schusim as there are seeds in a pomegranate. It's also mentioned in Sefer Minhagim that it is minhag Chabad to eat a pomegranate. However, we do not make the yeratzin. And the yeratzin we make only on the apple. It's a minhag to eat basar shamin, fat meat, and to honey and many other sweet foods in order to have a sweet, fat year. As it's a pasuk in Ezra and Nehemiah, ichlu mashmanim ushtu mamtakim, to eat fatty foods and to drink sweet things, and that pasuk is talking about Rosh Hashanah. So we eat an apple dipped in honey, we eat a pomegranate, we eat the head of a fish, and we eat fatty and sweet foods in order to have a fat, sweet year. and whatever other simanim, every family, every community, every neighborhood, based on their customs, and as everybody knows what their customs are. Okay. Now another minhag that's brought down is to dip not only an apple in honey, but it's to dip the piece of challah from hamaitzi in honey. And the Alter Rebbe mentions this in Shulchan Aruch. Okay. The Kaf HaChaim, there's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. He says you should dip in honey, but you should not dip only in honey. You should first dip it in salt, because dipping in salt is also a very important idea, al pi Kabbalah, in order to sweeten the dinim, which again, it's counterintuitive, but dipping in salt is to sweeten the dinim, which is obviously something that we also want to do on Rosh Hashanah, and therefore you should not miss out. You should not miss out on dipping in salt. That's what the Kaf HaChaim says. In any case, it's important, even if you don't dip in salt, for there to be salt on the table, as it's in Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe mentions in Shulchan Aruch also in Simon Kov Samach Zayin, because the salt protects us, bris melech. Okay, even if you're not eating it, but al pi Kabbalah, also to dip the bread into salt. However, practically, when it comes to dipping in salt in Tishrei and on Rosh Hashanah, there are different customs in different communities, and there are also conflicting stories about what our Rebbeim did. So in some places, they are careful to dip also in salt. In some places they're not. They dip only in honey. In Eitzer Minhagei Chabad, he wants to be medayek that we don't dip in salt at all, and we don't even put salt on the table. In Hamelach B'Mesibeh, which is transcripts of conversations that took place and other things that happened at the Rebbe's Shabbos and Yom Tov, not Shabbos, I'm sorry, Yom Tov Sudas. If anybody wants to look at it, it's the first night of Rosh Hashanah, Taf Shin Chaf Aleph. It says that the Rebbe dipped bread in salt at the end of the meal. Okay, you can make of that what you will, and debate how reliable what it says in Hamelach B'Mesibeh is. Again, these are unedited transcripts of people who were there writing based on memory. So can't say conclusively one way or another. I think it doesn't hurt to also dip in salt. You have to do it dafka first, dafka before, but at some point to dip the salt, to have the salt on the table, that's you have nothing to lose by doing that, and there's no clear evidence that that's specifically not our minhag. All the other simanim, the pomegranate and the head of the fish and the apple and honey, we eat only on the first night of Rosh Hashanah. So the apple and honey we also eat on Hoshana Rabbah, but that's a separate thing. We eat only on the first night of Rosh Hashanah. There are also various minhagim about this. Some people eat both nights. Some people eat also by day. Some people do throughout Tishrei, but we only do it the first night of Rosh Hashanah. That's also the implication of the language of the Alter Rebbe Siddur. However, dipping bread in honey, we do throughout Tishrei. When specifically do we do it? So it says in the Rebbe writes, both the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, Matzah Yom Kippur, the first 2 days of Sukkot, and Hoshana Rabbah. And the language of the Frierdiker Rebbe Sicha, which the Rebbe quotes in a few places when he writes about this, V'chal ha'mayed mehechetes. In other words, where do you come from? Where do you get the idea that you should dip in honey also on Chol Hamoed? So the implication is that we don't dip in bread, we don't dip in honey on Chol Hamoed. Needless to say, also Shabbos Shuvah, it's not even Chol Hamoed. So I guess not. Also, I don't know. I haven't found anything written clearly about Shabbos Shuvah. So again, there are different minhagim about this. What is clear is that we do again, first 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, Matzah Yom Kippur, and first 2 days of Sukkot and Hoshana Rabbah. From Hoshana Rabbah on, definitely not. From Shmini Atzeres, we dip in salt. Chol Hamoed and Shabbos Shuvah, it seems like not, but I believe there are in practice there are different minhagim about this as well. Another very common minhag is to have round chalas. That's well known. That minhag is also mentioned in Eitzer Minhagei Chabad. And also, practically, the common custom is to continue with the round chalas until after Heshaner Rabba. That's in practice what's done. Okay. This concludes the section of what we eat. Now we're going to move on to what we don't eat. The Alter Rebbe tells us, and it's based on the Magen Avraham, which in turn is based on Avudaram, Einem mevashlim b'chaymetz. We don't cook in vinegar. Why not? It's obvious. Vinegar is sour. We don't want to have a sour year. We want to have a sweet year. So, the Pri Megadim on Shulchan Aruch, a commentary on the Magen Avraham, writes that it's not just vinegar. We also don't. Custom is not to make barsht. Barsht is also sour, bitter. We don't have sour, bitter foods. And it's even more explicit in the Matei Ephraim, who says we don't eat dvarim, chamutzim, umerurim, we don't eat bitter or sour things. And the Kaf HaChaim brings down from the Chidah that we don't eat anything sour, not even lemons. And then he brings that it's from Tshuvas HaGe'onim, we only eat sweet things, we don't eat sour things. It's a very, very old and ancient Minhag Yisrael. So, okay, we don't eat sour foods, we don't eat bitter foods. What does that mean? You can't put salt and pepper in your food, you can't put a little bit of a couple of pickles in a salad. What does it mean practically? So the Aruch HaShulchan writes that this does not include peppers that you put as a minor ingredient in a dish. For example, he says, fish, it's impossible to eat fish without peppers. Now, I don't know it's impossible to eat fish without peppers, but I guess what he's saying is that that's how you make it. It's not a spicy food. It's fish and peppers. Peppers are there to give flavor. So it's hard to give it a precise definition of what's there. Just this is a minor ingredient is to give flavor. You have to use your common sense, and if it's something that's a minor ingredient that's there to add some flavor, that doesn't make it something that's sour, bitter, that we're not allowed to eat on Rosh Hashanah, or not allowed to, but the minhag is not to. It's an old minhag, and we can't be mezalzel in Nagi Yisrael. But this is so this is an important minhag, but it's something that's a minor ingredient. If it's just there to give flavor, and it doesn't make the entire dish, the entire food, into something that's sour or bitter, so that's not such a big deal. Doesn't seem to be such a big deal. There's a similar halacha in Basar B'chalav, in halachas of kashrus, that we know that a davar charif, spicy food, has a number of unique stringencies that don't apply to other foods. What's considered a spicy food? We know an onion is a spicy food. What about sunny side up with salt and pepper? Right. So the halacha is that if the whole thing is spicy, if a dish is full of hot peppers, then it's spicy. But if it just has a little bit of spicy ingredients that give a flavor, it does not make the entire thing into a davar charif. So I would venture to say that you can try to use a similar metric over here. Something that does not turn the entire dish into a spicy dish, into a sour salad, into a sour food, into a bitter food, then that's not an issue. Another minhag that the Rama mentions, and the Alter Rebbe mentions as well, we don't eat nuts. So what it actually says is egoizim veluzim. Egoizim veluzim are two different types of nuts. Some people translate them walnuts and hazelnuts, but as we mentioned earlier, giving precise translations of foods that are mentioned in Gemara and in Paiskim is a very tricky business. And practically, the minhag is not to eat any nuts. That's the reality. What's the reason? The reason is that there are two reasons. The Rama mentions one is that they're marbim kichavinia. They increase mucus and phlegm, and that makes it hard to daven. And the next day we're going to be davening for a long time, and you don't want to be distracted by coughing and having to get tissues and running out. So we don't eat nuts. We don't eat nuts. A second reason is that nuts, the word egoiz is b'gematria chet, and we said simana milsahi. So we don't want to eat something that is b'gematria chet. Okay. Now, famously, the Alter Rebbe omits the second reason of egoiz b'gematria chet. We don't really know why, but practically these are the two reasons that are given in Pesachim why we don't eat nuts. So again, as I mentioned, the minhag in practice is not to eat any types of nuts. It's explicit in the Kaf HaChaim. He says we don't eat not even poilim v'kitnias. Poilim v'kitnias is legumes and beans. So, for example, peanuts, even if it's not a nut, so it's a legume, so we don't eat peanuts. But the Kaf HaChaim says it all depends on who you are. If you know that it's going to increase your mucus, so then you shouldn't eat anything. Not something that's going to distract you from davening, was going to give you heartburn. So then don't drink too much, because then you're going to have heartburn the next day and your head's going to hurt and you're not going to be able to daven, right? And so it's not specifically limited to nuts. You have to use your common sense. But the minhag is not to eat nuts, not to eat legumes. And again, if the reason is that eggs is bigamatri yachet, so what's an eggs? So we can say from today till tomorrow that eggs is a hazelnut, but there is not really enough evidence to say conclusively that it's a hazelnut and not any other type of nut. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Again, the minhag in practice is to avoid basically all types of nuts. However, that's eating nuts plain. What about mixing nuts as an ingredient into another food? So let's think about it. If the reason is that it increases increases mucus, so then if it's mixed into another food as a minor ingredient, it's not going to be such a big issue of being mar bekichavinia. What about the reason that eggs is bigamatri yachet? So is it still bigamatri yachet when it's mixed into something else and it's not discernible? So in the Sefer Shiloh Teshuvas Yad Yitzchak, and he writes that no, it's not shaykh. It's not shaykh when it's mixed in to something else. It's not shaykh to say that it's bigamatri yachet, and he says both reasons are not shaykh. And however, in the Shiloh Teshuvas Ber Moshe from the Debertiner of, he says no. He says he agrees that there's no mar b'kichavnia. It does not increase mucus when it's mixed in as a minor ingredient in something else. But it says that the idea that eggs is bigamatria chet, so it still applies even if it's mixed into something else. What's the difference? It doesn't change the gematria. If I was entitled to an opinion, it's not a stabber. It doesn't seem correct to say that. We're still worried about eggs as bigamatria chet if it's mixed into something else. Well, let's think about it. What is the whole basis of this entire minhag? Like we mentioned, simana milsahi. When you see something, it creates a siman, and that creates a siman for the new year. There's no siman if it's mixed into something else. That's number one. What's a siman? There's no siman of eggs. Once you're eating nuts, so then you're eating a geizim. Geizim bigamatria chet. That's a problem. You're eating cake. What's in the cake? So there's flour, there's eggs, whatever. Nobody's saying you're eating eggs. Yeah, you're not eating eggs. You're not eating nuts. Nuts are a minor ingredient. There's no simana over here, so we could say simana milsa. Besides the fact that now you have to start everything you eat. You have to look at all the ingredients and figure out what the gematria is. If it's the gematria of chet or something else bad. So again, like I said, the Yad Yitzchak is mekel. He says the reason doesn't apply. The Ber Moshe is machmir. Like I said, my humble opinion, like the Yad Yitzchak makes more sense. But again, so there are these two opinions about eating nuts that are mixed in with another food. One who wants to be mekel certainly has what to rely on. So that concludes our discussion of simanim and the foods that we eat and the foods that we don't eat. Now I want to speak about briefly the second night. The second night, as we already mentioned earlier, we don't eat simanim in the second night. However, we do have something else, which is a new fruit. So, first of all, what's the story with the new fruit? Rosh Hashanah, as we know, the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, even though it's a 2-day Yom Tov, it's Kedusha Achas. It's called Yom Arichta. It's called one long day. What does it mean that it's called one long day? So it's a very simple halachic concept that even though all other Yom Tovim we keep 2 days of Yom Tov because of Sveika the Yoma, because they were never sure at the time when they set up the months based on the sighting of the new moon. So sometimes the Edom didn't show up, or sometimes sometimes they showed up late, sometimes they didn't show up at all. So they weren't sure at the beginning of the month or even by the middle of the month, if you lived very far away from Eretz Yisrael, so the shluchim, the messengers, were not able to come in time from Yerushalayim to let the people in the diaspora know when the Rosh Chodesh was established, and consequently, if you don't know when Rosh Chodesh is, then you also don't know when Yudalid is, or when Tesvav is, so then you also don't know when the Yom Tov are. So we keep 2 days of Yom Tov because of a suffix. So we don't know. So therefore, that has certain halachic ramifications. We know, since it's only a suffix, so we know 1 day is for sure not Yom Tov. So therefore, in certain halachas that have to do with preparing from 1 day of Yom Tov to the next, or something that is with Erev Tefshilin or other things, we're not getting into the details, we could be makel, because if yesterday was Yom Tov, then today is not Yom Tov. If today is Yom Tov, then yesterday was not Yom Tov. So, okay, if that's confusing, then just ignore it. At Rosh Hashanah, however, they always kept 2 days of Yom Tov, even in Yerushalayim, even in Eretz Yisrael, because, again, also a long explanation that we don't want to get into, but basically they were not, they had to start keeping Yom Tov right away from Lamed Tishrei, because you don't know if Edom are going to show up. If Edom are going to show up tomorrow afternoon, then it turns out today was Yom Tov, so you have to start keeping Yom Tov right away, and then eventually, due to certain events that took place, they instituted that even if Edom show up and on the afternoon of Lamed Tishrei, they say we saw the moon, so really today is not Lamed Tishrei, today is Lamed Elul, today is Aleph Tishrei, so that means tomorrow is a regular weekday, is Beis Tishrei. They instituted that no, we're still keeping 2 days of Yom Tov. So that's very briefly the reason of why Rosh Hashanah is Kedusha Achas is called one long day. If I lost you, then just ignore it. Because Rosh Hashanah is called Kedusha Achas, so therefore we have a machlekes between the Geonim and the Rishonim if you can make a Shachianu on the second day of Yom Tov. In other words, on every other Yom Tov, comes Yom Tov, we make a bracha Shachianu, we make a bracha Shachianu on all mitzvahs that show up occasionally on a consistent schedule. So when we make Kiddush on Yom Tov, we make a bracha Shachianu. Women, when they light candles, make a bracha Shachianu. Rosh Hashanah is one long day, it's Kedusha Achas. So we already made a Shachianu. So we make a Shachianu again. Right? Just like we don't make Shachianu on Achrin Shel Pesach. Why? Because it's not a new Yom Tov. It's the same Yom Tov. It's a Yom Tov Pesach. So you already made a bracha on the first day. You made a bracha on both days because it's fake of the Yom. You don't know which day is the first day. But once you made a bracha on both days, there's no reason to make a bracha again on Achrin Shel Pesach. It's part of the same Yom Tov. So second day of Rosh Hashanah is part of the same Yom Tov. So that's the opinion of the Geonim. However, the opinion of the Rishonim and the main opinion, la halacha, is that it doesn't matter. You make a bracha on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, just like you make a bracha on the second day of every other Yom Tov. And the reason for that, again, I don't want to get into too many tedious details, but the point is that even our ancestors who kept 2 days of Rosh Hashanah in Eretz Yisrael, in the time when they were Mekadesh al Pi Ariyah, based on witnesses who saw the moon, they also made Shachianu on both days of Rosh Hashanah. And we are doing it just like every other Yom Tov. We are doing it because of Minig Aviseinu B'Yadeinu. I'll tell you a secret. We know nowadays every other Yom Tov we are Bekin B'Kviyah Deyarcha. We're not Mekadesh al Pi Ariyah. We have a cheshbon. We know when Rosh Chodesh is. We always know when Rosh Chodesh is, and we always know that the first day of Yom Tov is Yom Tov, and the second day of Yom Tov is Chol Gomer Menatera, is a regular weekday. Nevertheless, we keep 2 days of Yom Tov. We don't put on tefillin on the second day of Yom Tov, even though it's a regular weekday Menatera. Because why? Minig Aviseinu B'Yadeinu, and we make a bracha b'shem Malchus Shachianu v'Kiyamanu v'Giyanu l'Zman hazeh. So Rosh Hashanah is not worse than any other Yom Tov. However, because out of deference to the opinion of the Geonim, we try to have a new fruit on the second night of Rosh Hashanah. On the second night of Rosh Hashanah, we don't do this any other Yom Tov. The Magen Avraham writes explicitly that people do this, and it's a mistake. But on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, we do have a new fruit. Okay, so now some practical halachas that have to do with the new fruit. First of all, when you make a shachianu and kiddush, you should have the new fruit in front of you, and yitin einav bay, you should look at it when you're making shachianu, because again, according to the opinion of the geonim, you're not making shachianu on kiddush at all. You're making shachianu only on the new fruit. So if the only reason we're doing this is to be to the opinion of the geonim, so therefore we look at the fruit. Women who make shachianu when they light candles, which nowadays is the minhag of all women. They should have the fruit in front of them when they light the candles. They should have it in mind when they even look at it when they're making a shachianu, and they should light it right before Kiddush. Another option is to wear a new garment. So if you have that, you can wear a new garment when you make Kiddush or when you light Shabbos candles, but the common custom is to have a new fruit. It's important to mention that not every fruit that a person didn't see in a long time is called a shechiyanu fruit. There are specific conditions, al pi halacha, what fruits you can make shechiyanu on. It has to be mischadish mizman lizman. It has to be a fruit that has a season, that goes out of season every once in a while and it's not available. It has to be nikr b'chidushay. It has to be obvious. It has to be apparent that it's new and it's from the new season and it's not from the old season. And this is not the place to get into all the details of shechiyanu and how it applies nowadays, that all fruits are exported and imported all around the world, and basically you can get any fruit any time of the year, in season, out of season, doesn't matter, besides the fact that there are greenhouses and refrigeration and other preservation techniques. Again, that could be a whole shiur for itself about shechiyanu. I want to get into it because in Rosh Hashanah, like we mentioned earlier, it doesn't really matter, because even if you don't have any new fruit at all, you still make shechiyanu, because the main halacha is like the opinion of Rashi and of the other Rishonim, who say that you make a shechiyanu regardless. So if you don't have a shechiyanu fruit, if you didn't have a chance to get one, you forgot or whatever, if you're not sure if your shechiyanu fruit is a real shechiyanu fruit, it's nothing to worry about, it's nothing to be stressed out about. You make a shechiyanu anyway, Kiddush, you can have in mind the fruit just in case, it doesn't matter. When you're going to actually eat the fruit, you're not going to make a shechiyanu then, because the whole point of it was that the shechiyanu and Kiddush. So to make shechiyanu again would be a bracha levatala. So again, this is important to know. A lot of people have this question, and people get worried about it. Even if you have no shechiyanu fruit, you still make shechiyanu and Kiddush, and there's no reason to worry about it or to be stressed out about it. Obviously, we try to have a new fruit, that's the minhag, but if you don't, you don't. We eat the new fruit immediately after Kiddush, before washing. Again, the reason by now should be obvious. The whole point is that we want the shechiyanu from Kiddush to go on the fruit. So therefore, you can't go wash and then whatever, it's going to be ready 5 minutes later for the shechiyanu. It's not going to work. We need to make the shechiyanu and eat the fruit right away. You make a bracha beir pri ha'etz on the fruit. Do not make shechiyanu, because either you already made your own shechiyanu, either when you heard Kiddush or when you lit candles, or if you didn't hear Kiddush, make your own Kiddush or light your own candles, then you heard shechiyanu you were yaitz shechiyanu from the person making Kiddush. Just like you were yaitz the other brachos of Kiddush, you're also yaitz shechiyanu. So you don't make shechiyanu, even if you did not make your own Kiddush, but you do make a bracha beir pri ha'etz. Our minhag, again, without getting into the details, is to eat a full shear, meaning a kazayas, of a fruit, and to make a bracha achrena before washing. We make a bracha achrena only on the fruit, not on the wine. In other words, even if it's a fruit of Shivas Haminim and you make a bracha mein shalish, you make a bracha only on the fruit, not on the wine. Again, without getting into the details, but basically the wine is connected to the soda. The wine is dvar avoy machmas soda. So therefore, we want the wine is exempt for the bracha achrena that you're going to make at the end of the soda, but the fruit is dvarim habayim shaloi machmas soda. Even if you would eat the fruit after washing and after making a mitzi, you would still make a bracha rishayna on the fruit. But in that case, it would still be exempt with the bracha achrena that you would make at the end of the meal. But in this case, because you're eating it before you wash, so then you have to make a separate bracha achrena on it. By the way, even if you forgot to and you wash, you still have to make another bracha achrena on the fruit that you ate before hamitzi. The fruit that you eat before hamitzi is not exempt with the bracha achrena, that with the birchas hamazon that you make at the end of the meal. Okay. So, in summary, you have a shechiyanu fruit. Obviously, the chatchila should make sure that it's a real, proper shechiyanu fruit. But if it's not a real proper shechiyanu fruit, or even if you don't have a shechiyanu fruit at all, you still make a shechiyanu. You should look at it when making the bracha of shechiyanu, either when making kiddush or when lighting candles. Eat it right away after Kiddush, before washing. Eat a full shear of a kazayas, and make a bracha achrona. And the last thing that I want to mention is that on Rosh Hashanah, just like on every other Shabbos and end of the year, there's still a halacha of Kiddush B'makom Suda, which means that the Suda has to begin as close to Kiddush as possible. Obviously, we have to make an interruption for a few minutes to eat the fruit. That's fine. That's not a hefsek for Kiddush B'makom Suda, but it's definitely not a reason to spend extra time stam talking, or definitely go into a different room. Going to a different room is a serious child of Kiddush B'makom Suda. Stay in one place, eat the fruit, make a bracha achrona, watch right away, and with that, we'll conclude our share for today, and go to Kiban Shtiar.